afternoon, and thanks for joining us again for our second day of the Virtual Advocacy Week. We've been so excited to interview different clients and professors, and also music therapy students and music therapists pretty much around the country. Today, we're extra excited to invite Dr. Zanders to speak with us today and to talk to you about what he does in his work. So, Dr. Z, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Mike. We're colleagues now, Marissa. You can call me Mike. So I'm currently a professor of music therapy at Temple University. I taught for 6 years in Texas at Texas Women's University. And that's currently what I do. I kind of do supervision too. I'm not doing as much clinical work, although I am doing some clinical work at Temple Hospital doing working with COVID patients and did mental health and assessment counseling to our surge facility up here. So I have been doing some clinic, but not as much as I used to, obviously, as being professor. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool, though. Can you actually tell us a little bit more about that? Because I don't think we've had anybody yet that has worked with COVID patients. So that's kind of like an interesting thing to hear.
You know this, Marissa, but I'm from Philadelphia. I went to school here at Temple, and I was a clinical director working with, this is a long story, I'm trying to make it short, within the city. So I worked with the state and Department of Health Services and our, the behavioral health insurance. So I have connections here, and I was a volunteer for crises. I had a lot of training in crises. And since I was working with kids and child welfare, we did these crisis trainings and, with the mayor and the Department of Defense. So when COVID came, Temple's basketball court, they call it the Lee Core Center, was a surge facility for the Department of Defense and the city of Philadelphia. And since I was already part of this volunteer reserve corps from a mental health exam as an LPC and working with the city years ago, I just renewed all my stuff and said, hey, this is before COVID started, say, hey, I'm back kind of thing online. And so then the surge facility was on Temple, even though it was not run by Temple. So I volunteered, and they wanted me to do mental health assessments and some counseling, brief, obviously, with the COVID patients in the surge facility. So these were people who were severe, but there wasn't space in the hospitals, and it was all set up. So it was like working in space because everyone except for the patients were completely PPE'd out. So getting our stuff on, double gloving, taping everything. It took like an hour to get ready, almost, being in there. So yeah, there's not much you can do. I couldn't do any music therapy because the instruments, you can't bring anything in because you can't take it out.
Yeah.
Except just talking about songs or listening to an iPod that they would bring in there, and I had to stay in the unit. So that was just more of the mental health part. I wish I could have done more music therapy stuff, but it just wasn't possible. And then now we volunteered. We do what we call environmental music therapy sessions at the Temple Hospital for the visitors and staff coming in the lobby area, and then we're going to live stream it to the COVID patients in their own building.
Oh, that's really nice.
Yeah, so we're trying. This is all volunteering stuff, service, if you will. Yeah. So we're trying.
That's great, yeah. And I think that's really helpful also for people in our community to hear, because as I mentioned to you earlier before we started, we were a big hotspot for a while.
Yeah. And
so I know our community is also looking for resources and ways to either give back or just like find resources to get through it, first of all. So that's really helpful, to hear about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, the anxiety and stress of being in a hospital, let alone COVID, if there's at least some distraction even.
Yeah, I think even everybody on some level is just feeling like this general tension in the world right now, and it's kind of just like affecting everybody's daily life in every way possible, financially, just emotionally, work-wise, just everything. Our environment has totally been shifted to like a survival mode.
I agree. And that's tough to live with from a psychological standpoint of not seeing a finish line. The finish line effect in psychology, in fact, will tell you that if you can't see a finish line, it really messes up with your psyche. And I agree with you. I think the physical part, we'll get over this with the vaccine, and it'll be, 6 months, we'll all start to be back to normal. But the mental health, the psychological part, I think it's going to take longer to get over, really.
Yeah.
Not having connection with people and being with people and doing music with each other,
Yeah. Hugging grandparents. I mean, we've seen just so many things like little things that maybe we didn't really, not that we didn't appreciate them, but that we maybe took for granted,
Yep.
has
Yeah.
just, I think, come back to us, also here, also in the Valley. And as far as our practice, we work with children that are in mental behavioral health programs. And so even just recently, we've seen like spikes in hospitalization with our patients, in the psych hospitals, and also like as far as reporting, abuse and, all kinds of things. Like we've just seen them go up for the first time. Some of these things we've never even had to report ever the entire time we've been here. And then suddenly we're filing, several reports a day. And I think it goes back to what you
Yeah.
mentioned.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking. But yeah.
Yeah. And that kind of leads us actually into, one of our questions about what setting specifically do you work in, and where do you feel like is your specialization, in music therapy?
Oh, yeah. Well, you probably know all about this. Well, I actually started working with severe IDD, or intellectual developmental disabilities, and it was great. And then I worked at a hospital. I worked in a heart transplant unit for 3 years during my master's. Then I got into GIM and had a private practice and did some advanced training. I did counseling, psych stuff. Did it outside of music therapy. I had trainings. But before I started teaching, I was a clinical director in child welfare, mainly with foster care, and biological families, but kids in foster care and then going back to biological families, adoption and foster care and reunions, or reunification. I did that for 8 years as a therapist starting out, and then you'll see this in music therapy a lot. We get such good training that we move up quickly to administration at times. So
Yeah.
so I moved up to there. So I was supervising, and then, but still doing therapy, and a lot of my work is in music therapy and child welfare, adolescents, particularly, and traumatized youth.
Yeah, that's great. And I know you mentioned, you're training outside of music therapy. So for some people in our community may not realize that, a lot of times as music therapists, we do have our board certification, but a lot of music therapists often pursue other programs. They might become, licensed social workers,
Mhm.
or work as counselors, just to kind of supplement the setting that we're working with.
Yeah.
And you are a licensed professional counselor.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you think that maybe like affects, how you practice as a music therapist, or what you have to offer clients doing both?
Well, it's funny. I always argue I'm a music therapist first. I only did the LPC to try to prove them wrong. Meaning, in a sense, that the
Oh,
LPC
thank you.
title, people seem to respect it more. I mean, it's a master's level entry, the LPC. But I would just say I'm more a music therapist, and having the LPC just gives me more opens more doors for promoting music therapy. So, by definition, when I'm working with clients, and particularly I'm LPC because I'm more aligned to the mental health side. As you know, in music therapy, people have more medical background, or rehab background, or developmental. Even though I've had experience in all those, my expertise, and forgive me for saying that word, is more in mental health. So that's where the LPC comes in too, for the doors and getting extra trainings. I have outside trainings like in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy and Gestalt training to enhance the music experience,
Yeah,
enhance the work. Yeah.
that's really great. And I think also important for, anybody listening to see that and understand that that is an option too, whether you're thinking about studying music therapy, but maybe you also want to do counseling. There are ways to combine both if that's something that you're really, really interested in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what made you just in general want to pursue a career in music therapy?
That's a question I ask everyone. I
Yeah,
never knew
actually, I think you asked me that on my first day of class.
because I don't know the answer to that still. I will say, you might know this, but I went to school to be a translator.
Oh, okay.
I'd studied 3 languages every year in high school. So I wanted to be a translator. I wanted to work at the UN. But I was a musician. And so when I moved to Philly to go to Temple as an undergrad, I was in the foreign language program at Temple, but I knew the city because I gigged playing around a lot, so I would still play in ensembles and stuff in the music department and knew people, from gigging with. And then, just long story short, the languages will always be there. I've always had a love for language, but music I would think is another language too. was I came over to the music building for a rehearsal. I saw on the board this thing about music therapy, and I thought, I really like music. I don't want to teach music because I just wanted to play, still. And I said, so this music therapy thing. I was like, you know what? If I'm going to switch, let's try it out, right?
Yeah.
So I did, and yeah, first class, I had Defining Music Therapy, the first edition with Dr. Ken Brucia, and that was my first intro class, and totally changed my life. Like, holy crap, this is not what I thought. And of course it was. I wanted to live my life in a sense, being with people and helping people, as opposed to, I don't know, making it about myself, I guess, So there was some idea of being of service. So that's what aligned me. And then once you get into it, I've had struggles. There's years when I felt like quitting, or I didn't want to be in my undergrad. I want to do something else, but staying with it and being with clients is really, has really kept me going. So, yeah.
Well, it seemed like it worked out for you.
I know, right? I know.
Yeah, it seems like.
Yeah, it has. It's been.
Yeah, that's amazing. And just also for those of you listening, Dr. Zanders was at TWU, which is one of the colleges that we'll be speaking about throughout the week, and he made such an impact there, whether he knows it or not. A lot of students have been very grateful, for his contributions. So we're super grateful just for you being here and for everything that you do. It means so much.
I'm honored and humbled to know people like you, Marissa. So,
well, thanks.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're kind of asking everybody, because one of the big questions we get, and and for those of you listening, you probably have it too, what is music therapy? I feel like it's such a loaded question as music therapists, because there's so much that we do, and it's so hard you mentioned defining music therapy earlier, and I think it does take like a whole textbook to kind of explain the impact of what we do and how big our scope really is. So if somebody were to ask you, to explain music therapy, how would you go about doing that?
It's a great question. The first thing I would ask them is that I would ask them, what do you know about therapy? Meaning, what do you know about health? And I'll explain it that way. Because if they know a lot about psychology, then I'll explain it through psychology. If they know a lot about medical, they're a doctor, nurse, then I'll explain it through the medical. Because I find that it's so hard to just give a definition without giving it some context. So that's how I explain it.
That's really helpful. Yeah, and they say sometimes speak in the language that the person's going to understand. So, and I do that a lot too. If I'm doing like a program proposal, if I'm talking to a doctor, I'm going to speak a lot more medically, than I normally would, or like a psychologist, and trying to maybe relate that way to them.
Yeah, and if I'm talking just a layperson, meaning someone that does not any healthcare field and wants to know, I will give anecdotal things or stories of do you remember the time when you were an adolescent and that song hit you and that you couldn't let it go? That's music therapy. In a context of health. Just little things like that. So yeah, it's just the context, like you're saying too. That what they are looking for, because this. You say it's a clinical and evidence-based practice of using. Everyone's like, who cares, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I've had to make a lot lately. We've been really into infographics and just trying to find ways to explain it in ways that are helpful to others. And because even I've noticed, I've been asking my family in the process of making these infographics, like, hey, what are some questions you have about music therapy? And I read the definition and I said, basically it's music for non-musical goals. And that's usually one of our go-to answers as music therapists. And even my brother, he's an engineer, so way out of healthcare field. And he was like, and what does that mean? Like, what's non-musical goals? And so having to kind of go through the list of cognitive, social, physical, and just finding ways to show how really broad our scope can be. And all the things that we can do with music.
Yeah.
So one thing that we have been trying to show is like the differences in what the day looks like for a music therapist, depending on the setting that you work, whether you are practicing as a clinician or you're a professor. So can you tell us a little bit about what your average day looks like right now as a music therapist?
Yeah, right now, like everyone else, it's different. It's a lot of Zoom calls and a lot of things. So as you know, I do teach more now. So we have classes and we're doing those online, trying to make it as best as possible online. And but when I was, before I started teaching as clinical director, it was not a 9-to-5 job, but it's an office, and you're I saw clients in my office, but I also was community based too. So we would go out and like social worker and go out and see people in their homes. So the days could vary. I mean, some days I'm taking kids to a psych hospital to 201 or 302, or it would be, 302 at that point. Some days you're working with a family. Some days starts real early because you get a call, because I used to be on call a lot, and then some and late. But it's just trying to keep promoting the music as experience to help and keep them engaged and coping skills and that context. So you will get, as you know, in private practice, you can set your own schedule and people have that idea of that certain days and certain times. But I've done both. I've done, 9 to 5, if you will, and also contracting and then as professor supervision. So that's, it just varies where you are and the need of the community too. So
yeah, that's true. And I think our community too has felt it. We're kind of doing a little bit of everything. Sometimes we're in the homes, sometimes we're here in the office, sometimes we're also at different facilities, visiting psych hospitals or visiting skilled nursing facilities, just kind of like wherever they need a music therapist, that's where we're going to be.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I would even visit schools to check up on my kids.
Yeah. And what about now that you're teaching full time? So how many classes do you teach a day? What kind of classes do you teach?
So at Temple here, so it was different than TWU. I taught about what they call a 12 load, which is a good load for teaching, and then you have papers and stuff. Here we do more intensives. So, and I'm only teaching graduate this semester, so it's 5 days fully, all days, not together. So they do this it's kind of like a hybrid, or what they would call a low residency. So instead of even during a regular, without the pandemic, students would come like for a 3-credit class. They would come for 3 days, do the experiences, and then have work for the rest of the semester online, because they would come from all over. So it helps people work full time and stuff. So we're still doing that, but it's now we do different times and different meetings. I don't have any weekly classes. The other class I'm doing is a clinical apprenticeship is with starting the programs at Temple Hospital with clinical training. So it's not really like a class, it's more like a seminar, if you will.
That makes sense.
But still then doing papers and theses and on dissertation committees, and supervising too outside of that. I am working with one private client pro bono, because he was a doctor who he got PTSD from the COVID facility, seeing all that and seeing people dying around him. So I work with him pro bono because a friend that I worked with in the city asked me to work with him. And at that point, it wasn't about the money per se. And the guy had the money. It was more about a need to fill in and thank them. So,
yeah, and that's beautiful. That's really awesome. And for anybody that's a healthcare worker watching, anybody on the front lines, thank you so much for what you're doing right now. And if we can find a way to give back, we would love to be able to do that as well.
Yeah,
so, we appreciate you. So I know you mentioned a little about this earlier, but what does your collaboration look like with other disciplines? I know you mentioned working with a social worker. Are there any other ones that you see commonly?
Yeah, in the hospital, doctors, nurses, I always, the multidisciplinary team, or what do they call them, interdisciplinary teams now, IDTs. Wherever you're working with, to try and as much as possible, with schools, it was OTs and communication therapists, speech language, or SLPs, speech language therapists, hospitals, doctors, nurses, staff, the clinic, social workers, definitely. Learned a lot from social workers. Teachers, religious figures, whatever, pastors, priests, whatever, community-based people, like especially strong community advocates, working with them for people too. So based on, again, on the need of the person I'm working with, of what do they need, the resources they need, for themselves. So try to be as collaborative as possible.
And I think that goes back to kind of we were talking about, for definition wise, I mean, our scope is huge. It might be physical. And if it's physical, we're probably going to work also, with the physical therapist. If we're working on speech goals, we're probably going to collaborate, with the speech therapist and so on. And all the way down to end of life hospice care. if we are on a team, we're going to work like he mentioned, with the chaplain to be able to make sure that those goals are in place, and maybe supplement it with some hymnals or
Yeah.
their preferred music. So
Mhm.
I think that's important for everybody to hear and know about too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So one last thing that I want to bring up today for the community as well is the question of how to become a music therapist. So for those of you that have been watching, some of our videos lately have been focused on how to go on the traditional degree path. So you go to school, you get your bachelor's in music therapy, typically right out of high school, and you kind of follow the more traditional route. But for anybody that's interested, that maybe you have a degree as a choir director, or you're in music education, an orchestra director, band director, and you're interested in becoming a music therapist, I think it's also important for you to know that there are equivalency paths that you can take to get that coursework required to be a board certified music therapist. So do you all offer at Temple University any equivalency programs for people who might be interested?
Yeah, and we offer both like bachelor's equivalency, so someone starting in music, and also master's equivalency who has a music degree but not music therapy. And what you're presenting, Marissa, is exactly right. You find a lot of people, particularly music ed, and I'm generalizing, of where they find that this is not what they wanted to do, and they want to come back and do music therapy. And work in that kind of idea. And the thankful thing is, the good thing is, if you have an undergraduate music degree, it's a little bit easier to get your equivalents because you have to do less of the music stuff. Where the undergraduate degree, like you mentioned, is traditional coming in, I think it's a little too much for high school students sometimes. It can be very overwhelming. Because not only the music therapy classes, but the psychology classes, the science classes, the music classes. So yes, I think it's very valuable. And as a clinician, it's hard to work clinically for a long time. I mean, there's a lot of need. So getting a degree later on or getting equivalency can really be a life change, could be, very valuable too. So
Definitely.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's offered. I think most schools do, because I think the predominant amount of master's program, I don't know the exact stats, but I would say 90% of master's students in music therapy programs are equivalency students.
Yeah, and that's really important, I think, for people to know too, because a lot of the times, like at least for the people that we've spoken to here in our community, are saying we just didn't know it existed, and
Yeah.
now either through like the Gabby Gifford story, or big headline stories, and also small things that we've been doing around the community to advocate. They're like, wow, this is like something that I've either always wanted to do but got discouraged, or this is something that I didn't even know existed, and now like I feel like would be everything I want to do in life. So
Yeah.
we definitely want to encourage you all, listening or
Yeah.
following along, to look out for those equivalency programs and see whether it's Temple University or somewhere close to you, wherever you are, to go ahead and try it and look more into it and see if that's something you would be interested in.
Yeah, and I would say most schools, and I can't account for everyone, but I know TWU and Sam Houston down there. If you wanted to talk to someone, people listening, about an equivalency degree, they'd be happy to talk with you, send you information, or even contact me if you like. This is what it's like to do that. And one other thought to that, Marissa, it kind of makes me laugh is, when I was doing it, doing an undergraduate degree in music therapy was like you were ruining your life. Like, do something more valuable, like be a doctor, or, be a musician. Now it's funny is that students come in because they're like, this is a real field now. It's professional, right? You can make money. I don't know, you don't make a lot, but it can be a real profession now. It's funny, it's yeah.
I think people find it hard to believe that it's like a real thing. Like, oh,
Yeah.
so you're actually a therapist. I'm like,
Yes.
believe it or not, we are board certified.
I know. Yeah, we don't just like jam and have fun, like, my hippie stuff, just chilling out, jamming to the music, I mean, we do sometimes. We just don't tell people that. We're more professional than that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think it's fun. Just in general, it's so fun to be a music therapist and to get to make that kind of difference, anything that we're working on, but doing it through music and focusing on music as the vehicle to reach those goals and to meet that need. It's a really beautiful thing. And if you love music as much as we do, you might find it really interesting to combine that, music and health together. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing about your experiences. I know, at least speaking for me, we're super grateful here that you agreed to do this, and I'm sure our community is just as grateful as well.
Well, thank you too, Marissa. I appreciate it.